I have been teaching myself how to make stained glass, and this was my second ever copper foil project. I bought the pattern only to realize while I was cutting out that it is quite literally impossible. This is the exact moment that I realize how messed up this pattern actually is and how upset I am that I actually paid for it. Because this pattern has to have so many adjustments to it before I can recreate it, I thought I would go over a video of doing what I would do differently the next time if I were to ever make this one again. I don't think I ever will because I would need to recreate the entire design. So I'm not sure if anybody has any insight into how to actually create this. I'm convinced that it was AI or the person who makes these patterns just doesn't make stained glass to understand what's actually required in it. I do know that even if I was using a saw, this would not be a possible cut. And nowhere in the instructions, nowhere in the photos when you buy this is it possible, or do they tell you to cut that out and lay it on top of the face. And even if that was part of the pattern where you're kind of going to solder or copper foil the nose on top of the face, the circle should have been separate and that face would have been one piece. I think part of the reason that I'm so fixated on making this such a big deal and kind of highlighting it is because I don't want other people who are just learning to think that that's a normal pattern. This was such a learning experience on how to develop your own patterns for me. So I guess maybe something good came out of it after all, but in the moment I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't realize that each cut, I realized it, but I didn't really understand that each cut I was making was going to alter that face so much. Which in the end, having to make all of those little pieces on the face worked out in my favor to kind of make it more like a mosaic design because this was such an early piece for me and I was not good at breaking glass at all. I'm still learning, especially with the curves, but I broke so much glass during this process. And some of those pieces I didn't recut because I didn't have the glass to replace it. I'm very new to this. I don't have the stock. I borrowed this, or I guess I should say I took it from somebody else and they allowed me to use their pink glass. So I didn't have anything extra. So I had to use those broken pieces because I honestly had no other option. So I guess the very first thing that I would do if I was ever going to recreate this would be to completely revamp that pattern in itself, figure out what pieces would go best in having to split the face. And now I can get into actual progress that I've made as far as making stained glass goes. You'll see here that I do one single cut for that angle. Well, two, because obviously I still didn't understand the concept of stained glass. But when I do it, the glass is just going to break on me in all of the wrong places. So even in the pattern being so terrible in itself, my skill level was just not there. I still didn't understand how to cut curves out, so this was going to be a fail from the beginning. I'm still very proud of it. I will still show it off. I don't care about any of that, but if I was going to redo it, I would have more knowledge in how to make my cuts and understanding of which direction to actually put the pattern on. And when I say that, I mean in actually tracing the pattern over it. I did understand the differences in which direction the pattern was going, but I think it was because I was so limited on glass that I didn't really pay any attention to it or care which direction everything was going. But if I am being realistic in my current process or progress when it comes to making stained glass, I still struggle with that so much, having to visualize which direction to put the pattern. So I really don't think that would be that big of a highlighted part for me if I was going to recreate this one, but it is something that I do pay attention to. And you're going to see here that I cracked the glass, and instead of recutting it, because honestly I just didn't have large enough pieces of that pink left, I decided to just make that two separate pieces because at the time I genuinely didn't understand how that was going to impact the way the final design looked. So that's kind of why that mosaic style ended up working out in my favor. And I think the most obvious thing that I would do differently is use the tools properly. I'm sure that you can tell I am cutting to the very edge, which is a big no-no, but I didn't understand that. I've gotten a lot better at it, although sometimes my hand still slips. And the actual gousers, I think they're called gousers, I'm holding them upside down because I didn't comprehend what people were saying when they said put the flat side up. But oh my gosh, does that make all of the difference. Copper foiling was another thing that I have improved so much on, and I am very proud to say that, but when I was making this, it was a complete disaster. I know that a lot of people will use an actual holder where you kind of put your rolls inside of it, and they really love those and kind of advocate for them, but if you're like me and you don't have one, or you're just starting out and not really quite ready to invest in all of that stuff, although they are inexpensive, you can just cut a piece of copper off of your roll. It works really great. I haven't had any issues with it, any major issues with it, although it is a little bit different to get used to. And that's going to eliminate all of the issues that you see me having here. I mean, obviously, this should have never happened, but I didn't know what I was doing. I was learning, I was testing out techniques. Don't judge me for it. This is all about learning and progressing. But if you cut a piece off, it's not going to coil on you, so it's going to be a lot easier to work with when you're actually wrapping it around. And while we're on the topic of copper foiling, I learned during this project so many different things about copper foil, but very important that you actually burnish it on there very, very, very well. I hope that burnish was the correct term to use, but you want to make sure that it's really stuck on there, and very important as well is to make sure that your glass is extremely clean before you start this process, as well as being extremely dry. And if there is a piece that you really mess up on or you're not comfortable with, redo it. It's not worth the aggravation later on. You will see all of those imperfections once you start soldering. Obviously, this was my second piece. I was not going to be very good at copper foiling. My pieces were not even at all, but I also learned when people talk about how you want the edges to be even, and if you have cracks in them, to go over them and kind of cut out what you don't want, take the time to do that. Like I said, you will see every crack that's in your solder because it has nothing to stick to, so you're going to see all of the imperfections in it. And making sure that that copper foil is really pressed into that glass is also just as important because it can peel up pretty easily, especially if you're like me, not knowing how to solder. As soon as you put that heat on it, it's just going to get stuck to it and peel it right off and create such a disaster for you. So use tools to make sure that copper foil is on there. You can just use like a permanent marker or something with that smooth edge and really press it into it. Make sure the copper foil is as smooth as possible. If there's anything that overlaps, cut it off. Take the time to just do it properly. Let's talk about soldering, and oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing to even look back at if you saw what I just did with that flux. Do not do that. Take a little cup, pour some flux in there, and kind of brush it on with the paintbrush or the brush that it comes with. So what happens next was actually intentional. For some reason, I thought that maybe a flat, tinned look would look so much better as the final project, and I was completely wrong. Not only will this create weak points on your actual piece and look just absolutely terrible when it's finished, more than likely, like what happened with me, your actual solder or your heat gun is going to get stuck to that copper foil, and when you go to pull it up, I don't know what was going on there, but it would get stuck to it. I don't know if it was my soldering iron, that it didn't hold consistent heat. I don't know if it just stuck to the copper foil. I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but what I'm doing here was the absolute wrong thing to do. I know that some people will go through and tin their pieces first and then go back over it again. I ended up not going back over it, but I would never tin it again. And that's because it just created so many more issues than there needed to be. And also, I would never keep adding this much flux. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought maybe if it would solder properly, if I added more flux, I have no idea. Now, I will give myself a little bit of a pat on the back for something that I did, at least somewhat correctly in this one, which was how close my pieces were to the actual pattern itself. And I don't mean the pieces that cracked and the pieces I had to recut, but on the outer edge, it actually kind of matched the pattern that I was working off of, which is really rare, so I was pretty proud of that part. I ended up becoming extremely frustrated with the tail itself, which was a me issue. It wasn't anything to do with the pattern or anything else, but I had no idea what I was doing. So I ended up not filming it because I was just so frustrated with the entire thing and couldn't figure it out, but I will talk about it because I think it's important with all of the things that I've learned so far. Now, what I'm about to say is going to be the most obvious thing in the world to so many people that hear this, but use pliers, wear a heat-resistant glove. That metal gets so hot if you're working with it. That would be the very first thing that I did differently if I was going to recreate this pattern. But I also would learn a little bit more about tinning before I went just straight into it. I do think this is a lot more difficult to put on versus a hook or a jump ring to actually hang your piece. So I'm not sure the exact way that I would do that going forward. Because you are going to need something to kind of balance that on there, because as soon as that solder heats up, obviously it's going to melt away and it recools so quickly that it's not very easy to work with. So I would definitely find a way to balance that little tail, whether it was setting it on something, whether it was figuring out a way to prop up my piece so that I could hold it with one hand with a heat resistant glove and then use pliers on the other hand or the soldering iron or kind of figure that out. And the last thing that I would do differently is prep the solder. I didn't patina this one because I didn't have an intention to. I thought the silver would look great, and it turns out that you're actually still supposed to prep the solder. And what I mean by that is to wash off that flux so well. Wash it again when you think you're done. Use some sort of scrubbing brush on there to kind of shine it up. And then use a magic eraser before you wash it again. Make sure it's completely dry and finish it off with some sort of wax. Because this pattern just would never work in real life, I don't think I would ever actually remake it, but it is really cute and I am still very proud of it because it's something that I accomplished that I did not think I was going to, and this is all about learning and making mistakes and figuring it out. So 10 out of 10 would still do it over again, but with things that I've learned differently.